Welcome to another virtual Lunch and Learn in our series for Strata Council members. My name, if you've attended these before, you may know, is Catherine Squires-Basson. I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline Management. And we offer a number of different opportunities for learning, both for our Strata Council members and some for residents and owners in our Strata corporations. These Lunch and Learns, again, sorry, there's no lunch for the virtual ones, but they are very convenient. Are opportunities for you, council members, to hear directly from service providers and professionals and to learn more about specific items that impact your strata corporations. Just a few housekeeping things. Please note that today's session is being recorded. It's the most common question I get. So yes, it's being recorded. Yes, I will send a link out to everyone who's registered once the recording has been processed. So if you're here, even if you can't stay, I will send you that email and you'll be able to watch it. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. For the questions, please use the Q&A function, not the chat, to type your questions so that they can be addressed all at once at the end. And one last thing, I mentioned it in the chat as well, but this is a webinar, so no one can see or hear the attendees, only the speakers. You don't have to change your settings. Only the presenters will be on screen, so you can relax. If you do need to talk to me or one of the presenters, you can send a message in the chat. And then if you're having any technical difficulties or anything like that, I can help you address that. And now I'm going to be quiet and hand it over to Christy Tamburi, Strata Property Manager and one of our managing brokers and one of the managers of our Strata department, to introduce today's speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. So we are very excited to have Tony Gioventu, the Executive Director with CHOA, the Condominium Homeowners Association, with us today. I think probably many people know who Tony is and have either read his articles or have had exposure through CHOA directly. But I don't think there's much more I need to say, Tony. I'm going to hand it right over to you and you can jump right in.
That's great, Christy. Thanks so much. I will jump right in and we're going to talk about planning for major construction. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat. We'll try and keep them all to the end, and I'll try to be brief and not go on for hours. So just a little note, if you drop something into chat, try to keep personal information out of it. There's 4 categories of repairs that we deal with for strata corporations, and generally the same for all property owners. They're either planned renewals, or we unfortunately defer repairs, or there are emergency repairs for things we can't anticipate, or we have insurance claims. And insurance claims and emergency repairs are often tied one with the other, but there's a dynamic difference, of course, of how they're funded and who is in control of the repairs. So planned renewals are my favorite because they're the most cost-effective, and this is where a strata corporation stays in control. They are in control of their decision-making, in control of their funding. They can work closely in partnership with their property manager and their consultants, and you can get through projects fairly smoothly with planned renewals. When you look at planned renewals, we look at cost options, what our construction overall is going to cost. We have different levels of consulting that we may use for services on design or for permits and planning. Excuse me. We have legal services, depending on the value of the contracts. And my rule of thumb is generally, if a contract is 10 or 25,000 or more, definitely consult with legal services. There are all kinds of landmines that we can get ourselves into. We have management services and any fees that may be associated with them as well. Disruptions are part of planned renewals. We will always have displacement. We will have utility shutoffs, access. There is going to be chronic nuisance of noise and smells. One of the projects I'm working on right now, we have all kinds of complaints from the owners because of the decking material that's being used on their concrete balconies. There's no way around it. It's a toxic, high performance component that has to be bonded to the area. To do it, it's smelly and it takes a little bit of time and it takes warmer weather, which of course means people have their windows open. So, there become some communication issues that we deal with on these buildings. We target them and we say, your area of the building will have the applications on next Wednesday and Thursday. Please keep your doors and windows closed. So there are some other issues that we deal with under disruptions. Tendering and specification. The reason we do this is we want the best services and we want competitive bidding. We don't always take the lowest price or the cheapest price, and we deal with that through our tendering process. But we certainly want the best product we can get for the best price to ensure we get the longest performance. And these are how we effectively manage cost-saving areas. And then our method of funding is probably the other pivot point that strata corporations will struggle with. If it's a planned renewal, hopefully we've planned for our reserve funds to be able to accommodate all of it or most of it. But we may still have levies, we might have corporate loans, we may have an asset like a caretaker's suite that's not being used anymore that could potentially be liquidated. And there are financing options for strata corporations to consider. Deferred repairs are my least favorite because they always spell crisis for a strata corporation. You're now responding to failures that are affecting homeowners. There are leaks in units. There are services that are not available. There are accessibility issues that aren't available. And when you start looking at your cost options, in addition to construction, consulting, legal, and management, we now have to impose some pretty high contingencies for damages for all the related services. And if these are deferred repairs and the strata failed to meet its obligation, we could find ourselves paying for repairs to strata lots as well, especially in situations, I'm going to use roofing as an example, but especially in a roofing situation where you have a roof that's been leaking for 6 months or a year and there's spot repairs, the strata's not replacing it. The owners in the penthouse units or top floors have a very credible argument to get their damages to their units covered by the strata corporation. Could be a CRT application, could be a court application, but the strata is compounding their liability through this now. Your disruptions to your community are going to be significant. Displacement will happen. You will have utility shutoffs, access becomes an issue, nuisance becomes that much greater. And then of course we end up with secondary damage to other areas of common property, structure of building, building components, and strata lots. Tendering and specification, they are our optimum choice, but you may not have that much of an option if you're under an urgent repair requirement. You might not be able to have the time to set specifications. You might have to be looking at multiple contractors to determine really where their fit is best and what are the pricing options that you have. And then, of course, your methods of funding. I put reserve funds at the very bottom because if you've been deferring repairs, you probably haven't been providing for funding for your reserve funds. So we're going to be looking at levies, loans, finance, liquidating assets, a few options like this as we go forward. Emergency repairs. Nobody can prevent this. This happens. My building, Daryl's building, at our office, a number of buildings through this winter, we've all had crisis situations that are well beyond our control. And the strata has to act immediately. So, the basic definition of an emergency in the Act is you have to act immediately to prevent further loss, damage, or safety risk to the residents. And safety risks can come under a variety of forms. It's not just injury, but accessibility to units or accessibility of getting out of the building. So emergencies have to be responded to immediately. We have to do a mitigation as soon as possible. So if something is going to need to be done in less than 30 days, it's essentially an emergency. So use this as the mitigation, but you're going to be dealing with some pretty high contingencies. And you're not going to be doing everything. That's the challenge with emergencies. You're going to be targeting the emergency, but it's quite likely there are going to be a number of other secondary effects of this emergency that over time the strata is going to have to deal with. You have disruptions to your community. Displacement with emergencies is the most frequent. All the elevators go down, or if you have only one elevator, or you have a major flood and most of the units are damaged. We have owners, hopefully, who have homeowner insurance, and hopefully under your mechanical policy, your insurance policy for the strata. Under your mechanical, you have some displacement allowances for individuals. People may not be able to get back into their units for days, weeks, months, or I hate to say it in some cases, even a year or two. So you need to look at what all of those options are. The other thing that happens with emergencies, if we've had a major subterranean or above ground water break or slope shift, there's a good chance your utilities may be shut off to your buildings. So, planning for some of these contingencies or knowing what to do at least is a good opportunity for the strata to have a bit of an emergency plan in place. It's also a great opportunity to remind your owners to have living out expenses as part of their homeowner policies. Tendering and specification, again, it's really tough, and you may only have in an emergency situation only one or two contractors who can be there today. You essentially might have the requirement of take what you get, unfortunately. And then funding, of course, hopefully you have money in your reserves to cover the immediate emergency, but levies, loans, liquidating assets, meetings to cover these are all essential. It is an unusual situation because I'm going to flip to the next slide for insurance claims. Under insurance claims, reserve funds or special levy of the owners is an option. The Strata Corporation doesn't need to have a special general meeting. If you've had an insurance claim on the Stratus policy and the deductible is $50,000 or $100,000, if you have sufficient reserve funds, you can use the funds to pay the insurance deductible. If you don't have funds, the Strata Council can automatically levy all of the owners for their share of the insurance fund, the same way we levy for strata fees. It does not require a 3/4 vote. And the principle of this is you have no obligation. You have to pay this. But if we go back up to the slide above, in an emergency situation, you have no obligation. You have no alternative either. You have to get the repairs done. And I think that we probably need to have some discussions from a policy level around how can emergencies be more effectively supported or managed. The severe rainfall that we had a few years ago that caused washouts across the interior and through the Fraser Valley, major emergency issues, and a lot of repairs were delayed because strata corporations just simply weren't approving funds to do them. There were delays in insurance coverage as well. We look at repairs for insurance claims. This is when it's responsive to an insurable loss. And the most typical things are flood, fire, and mechanical failure. Insurance claims could also involve, however, losses such as personal injury risks and those types of items. Those deductibles are generally lower, but when we're dealing with an insurable loss, the control of how that loss is managed is out of the hands of the strata corporation. You may certainly question, you may certainly evaluate, you can certainly have a consultant to oversee what's taking place at your expense. But if the entire claim is covered, the strata corporation really, it doesn't have any input. It's out of your hands with respect to what gets approved by the adjuster, the standard of repairs, the completions. However, my experience recently with most claims is there are limitations on values and there are limitations on what is covered. So it's well worth having a very close evaluation of your policies in the event of major events. If you have only 2 elevators and you do have a routine service contract, but one elevator has a significant failure causing a loss of access or service to your building, and you've lost your other elevator and you're now down to no elevators, which, if you've been watching the news, there are several of these buildings in the province. Your strata corporation policy under its mechanical clause may actually have a provision to pay for living out expenses of individuals while the elevators are being either rebuilt, repaired, or whatever that mechanical claim is. Look closely with respects to flood, mechanical failure, fire, to see what is actually available for your owners, and remind them the strata corporation, unless it's part of a policy, is not responsible for your living out lessons, your living out allowances. Disruptions in insurance claims are the same as pretty much emergency repairs. The project approvals under tendering and specification, they're approved and determined by the adjuster. You, at the end of the project, you will certainly want to review with a satisfactory lens that the work has been completed, that you're not left with any liabilities, but ultimately, this is in the hands of the insurance provider. So we go from there. We now know what kind of repairs we have. I'm going to approach this from the perspective of planning a renewal. Our depreciation report is clearly one of the best assets that we have for planning. It provides us an inventory of all of our common property and assets, and not common property that's over $10,000 or items like this, all common property and common assets of the corporation. The report, the depreciation planner in the report evaluates the condition of each component. They determine the current life of each component. They establish the life cycle renewals. So the current life example of your elevators is 28 years. The life cycle renewal is 40 years. The remaining life in your elevators before a major upgrade is necessary is 12 years. This is the cycle that we go through with depreciation reports. It estimates a projected cost for the new renewal. And I think I've seen this way too many times now, where a strata council and a property manager say, okay, our elevators are due next year. It says $200,000 for the upgrades. We have the money in the reserve funds. So let's get the $200,000 approved at our annual meeting. Excuse me. And they do this, but the problem is they now get to the contract, all the services, all of the additional requirements, there may be code upgrades that may be necessary. And it turns out that the actual cost is $350,000. A depreciation planner looks at the component. They look at the projected inflation rate, which we know at certain points has been volatile. They look at these type of cost evaluations. They can't predict every associated cost. And I'll show you the outcome of this on a roofing system. Their funding models that they provide are with the anticipation that collectively for all of your renewals, you're going to be looking at planned renewals in the hope of avoiding special levies. It's not likely possible, given the stage many of our communities are at with their funding, to avoid special levies, but we can certainly reduce them substantially. And then, of course, the other thing about a depreciation report is that it's disclosed to all potential buyers and must be disclosed to owners. Other side of this is our electric planning reports. So they evaluate the electrical demand and capacity within each property. If you're a bare land, townhouse, if you're a single building, whether you're a low-rise, high-rise, or maybe multiple buildings within a strata corporation, each of you will have some level of an electrical distribution vault. That transformer is going to have limitations based upon what the construction model was at the time. So when the buildings were constructed, be it townhouses, bare land, or apartments, the configuration of what type of utilities, appliances were going to be used and anticipated determines what the load evaluation for the property is. That's what's installed. But now we're at a situation where people want heat pumps. People want to do things like electric vehicle charging for every parking stall. We may have makeup air units on rooftops that convert to heat pumps, so we have cooling in common areas. We might have hot water conversions to heat pumps. But with that in hand, we may also have a number of energy savings, such as we've done electric LED conversions throughout our buildings. Or we've allowed for heat pumps to be installed in units for cooling and heating. In exchange, the electrical heating systems are removed at the same time. So there are ways of managing this, but the electrical planning report also is a document you should be consulting when you're looking at your depreciation report. On the surface, it may not have much impact, but if you're doing a re-roofing, for example, and at that time, which is the best time, you want to do a conversion from a conventional makeup air system with no cooling to a heat pump that provides cooling and heating, you're going to need your electric planning report to determine you have sufficient capacity, because they demand a very high level of power for their operation. So, you know, the other issue that we have to look at, which both depreciation planners and people who do electric planning reports are in consideration, There are changes coming to local governments. Local governments are requiring upgrades or conversions for electrification that are going to impose a higher requirement as we go forward to reduce consumption. This also has, of course, an impact on cost for all of us. So here we are. We're going to start by taking your depreciation report summary and look at it for the next 5 to 10 years. I prefer 10 years. Some strata corporations are of the, we do mortgages by 5 years. We do all kinds of things by 5 years. Let's just do a 5-year cycle. That's fine, provided every year you're doing the next 5 years. Identify the major components that are scheduled for renewal. And for most properties, it's pretty consistent. It's roofing, it's decks and balconies, it's exterior components, doors and windows on the exterior. It's elevators. There may be some structural requirements. There could be fire safety systems, hot and cold domestic water have life cycles of 20 to 30 years. You have pools or ponds or recreational facilities that require upgrades. Look at your key components to start a planning process and pick off the ones that are 5 years or less. Do them right away. How are we going to start a renewal process for this? So here we are with roofing. And let's use roofing for an example. It's a torch-on membrane. It's 25 years old, and it's due for replacement according to the depreciation report. So we've had no leaks or damage identified to date. So that's great news. We've been doing routine inspections. The projected cost of the repairs in the report is $700,000. I made this up. Don't quote me. It's not unrealistic, however, given what we see in the industry right now. So projected cost is $700,000. Important features here. They have 4 penthouse units with rooftop decking, and they have some mechanical equipment on the roof. We always say, is this our cost for approval and planning? And the answer is no, this is not. It's a starting place to give you a ballpark of what you may anticipate as you move forward. Depreciation reports can't plan for included projected conditions 25 years in advance. They are converting to once every 5 years now, not every 3 years. And so as you're moving forward, within a 5-year window, we may find there are code upgrades, technology changes, material and product changes that were not anticipated. So many of those have to be reviewed as we go forward. So you need to establish all the primary construction and secondary service costs. It's just not replacing a roof. There's quite a lot more involved with it. Look closely. Is there a heating, ventilation, air conditioning system on the rooftop? If you're in a high-rise building, are there chillers? Are there components that have to be removed, reinstalled, and basically recommissioned once the roofing system is done? Don't roof around them. They will come, these components and these roof areas will come back to haunt you. But if you plan this properly, make sure that you're aware what's going to happen with the complete roofing system. We do have solar photovoltaic systems on our rooftops. And so there are a number of buildings that have solar generation for electrical for common areas. If you're planning a roof renewal, those systems have to be removed and reinstalled. That will be another cost associated. And then the other item is, what kind of consulting will you actually use and what will the cost be? Are you going to use just solely a roofing consultant who specializes with respects to technical information? Or are you going to use a consultant with broader skills to look at all of the other types of service components on the rooftop that may require changes? First step is we approve the funding for a roof consultant. So they do a detailed inspection. My recommendation is always 2 to 3 years before your planned renewal if you are doing routine inspections. If you're not doing routine inspections, I'd step that back to 5 years. The roofing consultant may actually find there's either an urgent replacement for the roofing or the life of the roof could be extended for another 3 to 5 years quite safely. There are always benefits of doing this. The report of the roof condition can include a recommendation on renewals, construction methods, and materials. And at the same time, if you're ready to redo the roof, if we're now in the window that within the next 6 months to a year, the roof needs to be done, retain the consultant to develop the specifications for the replacement of the roofing system and any secondary components. Don't exclude secondary components because the costs are going to be there anyhow. Consult your lawyer on the procurement document. So I've seen quite a few bids that have come in from tender documents in the last few years where there was no legal review on the procurement document, which we call the tender. When it was sent out, there were a number of terms and conditions that were omitted. Most important condition, the Strata Corporation is not obliged to accept the lowest bidding price. It may not meet all the conditions you require, or other conditions such as any bid that does not meet all of the terms and conditions of the tender documents will automatically be excluded from the competition process. We do this because we want to know what we're buying, we want to know what's being provided, and clearly what the obligations of the contractor are going to be to meet our service and warranty requirements. Once we've done this, we issue a tender. The tender is often issued by your consultant. And I use the term qualified industry contractors. There's quite a variety of them for roofing. So this isn't a little group of 3 people. It's generally 8 to 12 to 15 contractors. You have a bid with a fixed deadline date, and you are requiring sealed bids be confidentially returned back to the consultant. One of the reasons we do this with sealed bids and that they're confidential is to protect the proprietary interest of the contractors. They're doing this in good faith for you. You need to protect their proprietary interest. It's also one of the reasons why bids are not a requirement under Section 35 of the Act to be disclosed. There could be a false summary, so a summary that shows all the prices of the different contractors, but it doesn't identify them. So it's really a false or a blind summary. So, so the pricing and details are on merit. One of the questions to often ask when you're looking for bids, you're looking for issuing a tender is, can you perform the work within the next 6 months? What is your time window to complete the work? Do you have the capacity to do this within a reasonable time period? You don't want a contractor who's on and off your site. Get on the site, get it done, get off. It's better for them, better for you, but qualify that within your bidding process. Your lawyer should have the skills and the knowledge to be able to identify all of these additional conditions within the tender documents. The consultant gets the bids, they summarize the bid, Strata Council selects, the contract is negotiated, your lawyer basically reviews it before you're done. So here's one of the big catches though. During the cycle of evaluation, we often do things like information meetings of owners. We let them know what the prices projected are going to be roughly. Be generous, don't be conservative, because as everybody knows, when you mention higher prices, it'll come back to haunt you. Someone's going to say, hey, you quoted this would only be $400,000. How are we at $750,000 or $800,000? Don't quote prices unless you're absolutely certain of their accuracy. It will keep you out of a lot of trouble. But here's the challenge we have in the industry. Do we approve the funds first, or do we wait until we see the bids to approve the funds? So think of this from the contractor's perspectives. They do invest a fair amount of time and money in creating the bids when specifications are created. If they're bidding and they're the successful bidder, and now the strata takes this bid to the owners and the owners don't approve it, because you have special levies, you have, you need a loan, which is taking time, or the owners just simply don't approve it, then you have a contractor who's probably not going to be that content with what you've done. If you can get ideally the best pricing from your consultant possible, fit in all the variables, and you can have preliminary approval of the owners for this, then that gives you some assurance that when the contract bids come in, they can be awarded. An alternative to this is if it's a significant project, and significant projects right now can easily exceed 60 million. If it's in a strata, if it's a significant project, you may be putting in tendering costs, bid costs. So you might provide $5,000 to every qualified tendering party as a compensation for their time spent. If you're not going to be able to approve the funds first, and there are going to be significant delays. The downside of this is that general contractors and service providers get a little gun shy around strata corporations because they go through all the work and then the strata doesn't approve the work to go forward. So it's another little tool to look at. Consultant estimates are generally accurate to market conditions. So when your consultant has been on site, they've set up the specifications, you've looked at all the potential scopes of work, you can sit down with your consultant and probably evaluate a pretty good price, very close, build in maybe 5 or 10% for bidding. This is something that you can go back to your owners with. And if you approve your funds in advance, make sure you have some contingencies and identify things like code upgrades. Are there electrical issues or drainage issues that have to be done? Are there material changes? And talk to your consultant. The consultants are very good about providing recommendations. A key word I always ask consultants, I know it drives them crazy, but I really make them work hard. And my comment is generally, is there a question or a component we haven't identified that you need to bring to our attention that we need to be aware of? Put it in writing, get it to your consultant. This is what they're there for. And we have very good consultants in the province, so it's well worth the investment. So we start looking at the depreciation investment. So the original estimate was $700,000 to be done in 2025. Well, let's take a look. Did that include everything, such as demolition and disposal, site security and safety, hoarding during construction over areas that would be exposed to prevent damages, building permits if they're necessary? Most times for roofing, they're not, but there could be major construction involved that requires permits. Code upgrades, removal or installation of any surface mechanicals, solar or decking. What's the GST going to be? Start adding some of these things together. We're at $850,000. Doesn't take much to now come to a reality check of what kind of services we're going to be providing. So we're at $850 plus our legal services, generally for about $2,500. So do the comparison. This is nothing compared to the trouble you can get into. For about $2,500, you can get your tender documents and your general construction documents reviewed. If it's a very large, complicated scope, you might want to double that or talk to your lawyer. It might go as high as $10,000. Consulting fees. Your consultant is not only setting the specifications, but they're reviewing the scope of the work, they're certifying payments, and they're going to be certifying satisfactory completion on the project as well. Ask what the percentage is. It varies depending on the consultant, the profession, and the work that's being done, but it can be anywhere between 2.5 and 12% of the gross value. Start adding all of these costs together. Management costs. Your property management agreement will have additional costs to manage the transactions and services for major construction. These services will include collecting levies. They may involve court actions if somebody doesn't pay a special levy, or just the general correspondence and approval and payment of fees. So look at your service agreement, find out what additional costs may be there. And so the other thing is that the biggest benefit is under a planned renewal, we can control the costs, we can know what they are. We start getting to unplanned renewals and the world changes, so you start deferring construction. My rule, generally speaking, is projected costs easily start to be 15 to 30% higher for almost everything. So you start significantly increasing your liability and costs, plus the responsibility for damages that may occur. And we do see insurance exclusions. Buildings that have frequent roof leaks haven't replaced the roofs. We now look at their insurance policy and there's an exclusion for any loss or damage to individuals, liabilities, or to the common area in the event of a failure of the roofing system. This also you will see frequently applies if you have polybutylene piping and you've done nothing to replace it, or if you have a building envelope failure and have done nothing to replace it. And again, structural may be an issue as well. Special levies, when you're deferred, they're inevitable. And, you know, my experience, and I think we can all agree, is that the 99% reason people vote against special levies is simply because they can't afford them. If we'd stepped back and we'd been planning 5 or 10 years earlier, even at an increment of $10 or $20 a month more per unit, it makes a significant difference to the impact of special levies, whether they're actually necessary or even the amount that's necessary. So, you know, that's another one of the issues that we deal with. And now we have the problem where the owners have voted against a special levy, and we're probably in court. There are 2 provisions under the court considerations in the Act. And the first is where more than 50% of the votes cast at a general meeting are in favor of the repair, but you can't get a 3/4 vote. So in this situation, the Strata Council, based on the consultant's reports, now retains the lawyer, and they make a court application, and the court will order the levy and order the repairs. Now, the positive side of this is the corporation still stays in control of the project. If you can't reach that point, however, or if you can't get the order because the dynamics of the repairs are far too extensive, you're probably going to find that an owner or a group of owners are going to apply to Supreme Court for an administrator appointment. And the administrator is going to basically execute the order of the repairs, the levies, the collections, and will be responsible for the oversight. So the cost for the delays, the court and administrative services are all now added to this project, including the legal services of your lawyer, which are substantially higher. I know it's difficult for some communities to avoid this situation, either of these situations, but my recommendation is always stay in control of your decision-making and of your funds as you move forward. It's just in the interest of your corporation. So I'm going to stop there. I've been talking nonstop. My voice is going to go. It's 40 minutes right on the nose, Christy. So questions, if any. Maybe there are no questions. I've just answered everything.
There were a couple, although very, very great presentation. Thank you. The first question, really simple. Will we be sending out the slide deck? So are you able to share it with us to send along?
I will pop it over to you as soon as we're done.
Excellent. Thank you. And then the second question we have is, our strata has difficulty getting quotes and or bids for the work that needs to be done. How do we resolve this?
So is that geographic maybe? Some stratas are limited to just maybe 1 or 2 service providers, right? And
Yes.
You can't necessarily do tendered specifications. It's not always possible. And we see this in the Kootenays and in Northern BC. What you do is you talk to a contractor you're accustomed to, and then put all of your agreed services in writing. You can still put this into a good written contract. Verbal contracts or email agreements of you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, they always come back to haunt us, really. But talk to your preferred contractor and just simply say, look, let's negotiate what's going to happen here. How can we get this work done? What services can you provide for us? Let's get a written agreement for the whole thing. We'll wrap it up with our lawyer and your lawyer, and let's go forward. And you may not even be able to access a consultant immediately in your area. You might have to be in a situation where you have to negotiate directly with the contractor. And provided you have a good contract between the parties and a good, clear understanding of the expectations, and also a payment cycle that is almost reward based. So here's the downside of it. In Prince George last year, one of the stratas negotiated with the contract for new windows. All the windows be taken out, doors replaced, etc. They weren't doing the cladding. The contractor required a 50% down payment and then disappeared. So, you know, what are you doing for security? Also, manage your funds closely. Nobody can afford to lose 50% of a project in payments. And again, that's another issue, right? And so I think, but if you balance and you have a reasonable contractor, they'll be very willing to work on you. You're going to have to pay some deposit to get the contract going because you need some consideration for this contract to be valid. Even if it's 5 or 10%, that may be sufficient. But talk to your lawyer and your manager, and if you have a consultant, and figure out the best way to do it.
Excellent. And definitely, we are on an island, and that is very, very true at times with contractors. Sometimes it's tough to find anyone.
Exactly.
Next, we have Craig, who has asked, we had a pipe backup and it was identified that the pipe needed to be cleaned. While waiting for bids, damage to condos occurred because the pipe backed up. Is the strata responsible for unit repairs?
So drain flushing is something that in buildings should occur at least every 3 years, but I would say sooner depending on the design of your building. So if you're in a conventional 4-level apartment building, and there is a decent distribution and there hasn't been a history of issues, maybe every 3 years, but I'd also make sure that my exterior drains are flushed at the same time. If you're in a high-rise building where you have a very concentrated drainage system, especially on the ground floor levels, I'd be almost looking, at least testing and looking at them routinely. But every 3 years, it's really an expectation because the backup is a problem. Now, who's responsible for the damages, right? So if there have been drainage issues and the Strata Corporation are trying to find a contractor and find somebody to do this and do the flushing for you, it's not necessarily neglect of the corporation. It's just simply a condition of the industry. Damages to strata lots, unless there's an insurance deductible claim triggered, are the responsibility of each strata lot owner. Now, for strata lot owners, they need to be ultra vigilant when they're purchasing their homeowner insurance because homeowner policies don't automatically include sewer backup within units. So make sure that's actually included on your homeowner policy. But that being said, I think assessing when strata councils and managers have reports from owners that, look, my kitchen sink backed up, or we're having a slow problem with drainage of showers, or we've been having issues with toilets on the first or second floor, it's a pretty good telltale sign that there are some issues with your drainage system, and you need to probably do some flushing and evacuation. And it's a routine maintenance item. So if the strata really has been aware of it for 2 years and done absolutely nothing about it, then the owner may have some reasonable grounds to file a claim against the Strata Corporation.
Perfect. Next question. To what extent should the property manager be involved in a project?
Depends on who is going to be the coordinating or lead point of the project. So if you have a consultant who is going to be basically setting specifications, certifying payments, reviewing site conditions, doing site visit reports, and evaluating the project, then you're going to see that 99% of the work is done by the consultant. Property manager at that point may only have the responsibility of making sure the bills are paid as they become authorized. But you might not have a consultant. You might have a relationship with a contractor, and someone is going to have to work with that contractor pretty much on a day-to-day basis. So it may, in fact, be quite a lot of work. I think you need to define really what the scope of work and the service is to determine how involved they actually are. And then, of course, your strata council needs to stay routinely informed. And the property manager should do that because they are the ones who are ultimately going to be making decisions and be liable for the outcome of this project. There isn't really a black and white answer to this question.
Alrighty. Are stratas obligated to cover window and roofing replacements on owner betterments?
Well, owner betterments are alterations to common property. Let's call them what they are. If you have a window replaced or a roof replaced, and these were alterations to common property, you need to determine how it was done, who did it, was there an alteration agreement first? That may have some implication on who's going to ultimately be responsible. But if there's historic alterations, People put in skylights. Townhouses, this is a common thing. Somebody's put in skylights, then they move, they sold the unit, new person comes along, no disclosure of an alteration agreement or anything like it. Those skylights are still common property. They're still the responsibility of the strata corporation. So a strata needs to closely look at their records and evaluate, is there an alteration agreement? Who's responsible? What's taking place? This is where record keeping, I think our industry is pretty bad on record keeping, where we don't have sweet files and historic alteration agreements that get carried on from owner to owner. There's no assumption agreement from the subsequent owner. And then you have a situation where the strata corporation is now owning this component they're having to repair. Sometimes that we've had this happen recently in Sunshine Coast, where an owner installed without permission skylights, didn't tell anybody, strata never inspected, the new buyer comes in, buys, assuming the skylights were installed by the owner. They were not by the strata corporation or part of the construction. They are not. And so now the strata corporation is responsible for these things. They were never authorized. So the strata's response was, you can either pay for them and keep them as the repairs are needed, and we'll need you to sign the assumption agreement, or we have to be responsible. We will have them removed and have the roof restored. What's your choice? And sometimes there's a choice, and depending on what people want. But skylights themselves generally don't leak. The leaks are usually caused by bad installation.
Alrighty. And just further to the question on the contractors and getting quotes in, this attendee just noted that they contacted 10 contractors, 7 visited the site, and they received only 1 bid. They're on the lower mainland and in a large city area. So it happens whether you're on the island or not.
It happens. And some industries, there are very few contractors too. That's the other problem, right? It's, for roofing, we might have 10 or 15 roofing companies that will do the work, but they're busy. We've had a number of the family companies have either been amalgamated with other companies or closed down. We have fewer roofing companies now than we had 20 years ago, and we have significantly more buildings. So you start to do the math, you're going to see that the roofing companies are going to essentially be focused on the properties that really are profitable for them. So that's, again, a good planned process really makes it effective, but also conveying when you're doing your bidding that the strata corporation have already approved the funds from their reserve puts a lot of confidence for the contractors. We have a lot of contractors that spend a lot of time bidding and setting up work, and then the strata doesn't approve the project. It's really frustrating for the industry.
Absolutely. What are the standard practices when there is damage to a strata lot via common property?
No, there are no standard practices. That's the challenge. I guess you have to go and evaluate why there were damages, right? Was there a roof drain that overflowed, and as a result of an incredibly heavy rainstorm? That may not be the strata's responsibility. That's where one of the circumstances where everybody is sharing in the pain. But it may also be a situation where if you do a bit of homework, it's apparent that the roof drains have never been maintained for the last 15 years. It's during construction, and there's a lot of debris that gets on roofs from animals and birds and stuff. During construction, you'd be surprised the number of roof drains that do not work in buildings. And so the overflow scuppers or the water just sits there. Routine maintenance is necessary. I have a building in East Vancouver when it's a high-rise building, and when the roof drains were tested from original construction, so this is 30 years ago, we discovered that the roof drains actually ended on the 5th floor and were never connected anywhere. And so, so this water has been sitting in these systems for 25 years, and the roof, of course, is not draining, which is seriously problematic. So, testing your roof drains, make sure they work and they operate. It will go a long way to extending your roofing systems. And get a roofing contractor to do this. This is not a volunteer job.
Thank you. Would it be necessary to use a consultant for replacing all the windows in a 36-unit townhouse complex?
I would. And the reason I would is because the windows themselves are generally not the problem. They usually will perform incredibly well. The installation with the integrated existing building system is where the problems occur. This is where modifications are made, caulking and sealants are used to hide errors and things. This is where we get into problems. It shouldn't be a significant cost for this. They don't, sounds like they don't want to do an envelope evaluation, but they'd want to do an energy upgrade for all of their windows. Do the energy upgrade for all of your windows. And find a consultant who's just basically going to overview and do site visit evaluations of the work that's been done. So the installation itself has been properly executed.
And then we have from Corey, we have heat pumps, which were installed during construction by the developer, but are located on limited common property. We have no specific wording in our strata plan about them. Do owners have any responsibility for maintenance, or would it still be the strata?
So if they're located on limited common property, they're going to need their bylaws to articulate what the responsibility is. So those heat pumps and the responsibility for the limited common property and the heat pump located on each limited common property designation would be, if they want, would be the responsibility of each owner to maintain and repair. My suggestion, though, is it's better to get into a service contract with a single service provider to maintain all of them. Because what will end up happening is some of them will not be maintained and they start to get noisy and disruptive as they age if they're not maintained. It's cheaper for one service provider to maintain them all than it is for individual owners to take care of it, because most of them just generally ignore it. As long as they throw a switch on and it works, that's all they really ever care about. The other way you can word this bylaw, and I would talk to your lawyer about doing it, is that any repairs required to a component designated for a unit on limited common property will be the financial responsibility of that owner. You could do that, but you're going to have to look closely at the wording and identify clearly that they are in fact LCP for each unit.
Is there a rule of thumb? Sorry, what is the rule of thumb at a strata? Sorry. What is the rule of thumb or an estimate of what a strata should plan for legal fees each year?
There is none. So, depending on your services and your needs. Interesting thing is that budgets aren't about what did we spend last year, what did we spend this year. Budgets are about what are we planning to do this year, what funding will we require this year. And so some years we might need $1, $2, $5, or $10,000 of legal fees because we're doing some bylaw upgrades. We're going to have a special levy and we're going to have to be doing some collections. We'll have some contract review. Other years we may not have anything. So I think the Strata Council needs to evaluate and explain to owners why the variances occur each year. And if you didn't spend $5,000 last year and you don't need it this year, why is it in your budget?
All right. This one I don't quite understand, so I'm hoping you might. What if the alteration is within the strata lot? Who pays for windows and roof betterment?
So alterations within a strata lot fall into the responsibility of an owner to maintain and repair their strata lot. But if it's a roof and a window, I think we'd want to look closely at the strata plan to determine if they are in fact in the strata lot or if they are common property. And that gets defined from a number of areas. Partly in the definitions under Section 1 of the Act, it defines what common property is. Then you look at the registered strata plan to look at the boundaries, and then you look at the bylaws of the corporation. The bylaws may say that all doors and windows on the exterior of the building are the responsibility of the strata corporation, and it won't differentiate between betterments, upgrades, or anything else. So yeah, all three areas need to be evaluated.
Okay, and we have one final question. You talked about costs over a strata deductible. What if the repair is below the deductible? Would owner's insurance kick in? what about the emergency repair costs?
So if there is, so insurance is actually pretty simple. If there is no value that triggers an insurance claim on the strata's policy, then the damages to individual strata lots below the claim amount would be the responsibility of each owner and their insurance provider. The way the insurance is written in our legislation, if an insurance claim is triggered, then the insurance will affect repairs. Again, though, those repairs may be limited to specific components within the strata lot, but not personal items. So your homeowner personal insurance may still come into effect and what's happening. And I forgot the last part of the question.
What about emergency repairs?
So emergency repairs are emergency repairs. If it's no insurable claim associated with it, and I'll give you a good example of an emergency repair, then the strata corporation just pays for it. It's common expense. And if there's some damages to a strata lot as a result of the emergency, but it's not an insurable claim, same thing. Owners still pay for it. Bare land stratas and townhouse complexes, I think more than any area, need to be aware of the underground obligations that they have for infrastructure. Their sanitary, their water, there may be gas lines, telephone lines, cables, all these things that run through the community. Once it leaves the municipal, with the exception of Nanu's Bay, once it leaves the municipal property, the obligation to maintain and repair those components is that of the strata corporation. So it's not necessarily an insured claim. So that's one of the questions for bare land and townhouse to talk to their insurance brokers. Are infrastructure losses covered, and to what extent are they covered? A lot of them are not. So you end up having a break of a water line underground, causes a washout, you have an excavation, has to be repaired, or a sewer line, you have sanitation issues, whatever it is. Right now, it depends on where you are in the province, but the cost per linear foot, so this is 1 foot by 6 feet wide by 6 feet deep. The cost per linear foot is about $8,000 for a damage or repair. So if you have to do a 50-foot excavation, it's $400,000. And that includes the excavation, the restoration, the refilling. There may be inspections required, permits required, and then, of course, the repaving and the restoration of the landscaping. It's an overwhelming expense that more and more communities are starting to face, because we're now getting into communities that are 40 and 50 years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, it's 12:59. We have gotten through all of the questions,
Outstanding.
and perfectly within time.
That's great.
So I will thank you for attending. I know Catherine has some closing comments before we wrap things up, but I certainly appreciate you attending and
Oh, it's a
walking us through
pleasure.
that.
Pleasure. Always have. Well, and I get loads of questions because they always pop up in the paper, right? So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who also attended today. Just to follow up on my comments at the beginning, we did record this session. We will be sending out a link to the recording in the coming week. We'll attach this slide deck, as Tony noted. Feel free to share the link that I send to you with other council members or people that you think would be interested. We'll also be posting the recording to our YouTube channel, as we always do, so you can find it and past sessions there. As mentioned, please complete the survey at the end of the session, or feel free to reach out to me directly. We're always working on new content, so we really appreciate any suggestions you have for future content. And that is that. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.